Picture this, a warm summer afternoon in the heart of Austin, Texas. The sun casts a golden glow over the pristine streets of a high-end suburban neighborhood where every home looks like it belongs on the cover of a luxury real estate magazine. Birds chirp lazily, and the faint hum of lawnmowers fills the air. It's the kind of neighborhood people dream about, the kind where success is measured in square footage and meticulously landscaped front yards. For James Mitchell, this isn't just a neighborhood, it's the culmination of everything he's worked for. At 42 years old, James has spent nearly 2 decades serving as a police officer, pulling countless overtime shifts, saving every extra dime, and dreaming of the day he'd have a place to call his own. He grew up in a cramped apartment in Houston, where homeownership wasn't just out of reach, it was something people in his world didn't even talk about. But James was determined to break that cycle, and now he has. His new home is nothing short of breathtaking, a 3,500 square foot, 2-story masterpiece with a wraparound porch and a backyard that looks like something out of a resort brochure. The highlight, a stunning 30-foot swimming pool, its crystal clear water shimmering under the Texas sun. Leaning back in a reclining chair on his patio, James takes a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. The scent of freshly cut grass drifts through the air. For the first time in a long time, he allows himself to exhale. This is it. This is home. But just as his eyes flutter shut, the sharp wail of police sirens shatters the peace. His heart sinks. Something tells him his fight isn't over yet. 2 months earlier, the house had still smelled like fresh paint and polished wood. James Mitchell had just finished moving in, carefully unpacking the boxes that held the pieces of his life. Every picture frame, every book, every small decoration had been earned through years of sacrifice. He wasn't just unpacking belongings, he was unpacking a dream that had taken nearly 2 decades to achieve. That's when he first noticed Linda Davenport. She stood at the second-floor window of the house next door, phone pressed to her ear, watching him with an unsettling intensity. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her eyes, framed by perfectly sculpted brows, tracked his every move. At first, James didn't think much of it. He gave her a polite wave. She didn't wave back. Instead, the curtain snapped shut, leaving an odd feeling in James's stomach. It wasn't the friendly welcome he'd hoped for, but he brushed it off. New neighbors took time. Maybe she was just cautious, or maybe she wasn't the neighborly type. He had more important things to focus on, like making this house a home. The next day, James made a quick run to Home Depot for a few tools. As he stood in the checkout line, his phone buzzed a notification from his newly installed security system, a motion alert. Confused, he tapped the video feed. There she was. Linda had walked right through his unlocked backyard gate, a designer swimsuit clinging to her like she was stepping onto the cover of a luxury magazine. She carried a monogrammed beach towel, her expression casual, completely unbothered, like she had every right to be there. James's pulse quickened as he watched her settle into one of his lounge chairs and dip her perfectly pedicured feet into his pool. What the hell? Rage bubbled under the surface, but years on the force had trained him to stay calm. He left his cart in the aisle and drove home, gripping the steering wheel tight enough to make his knuckles turn white. When he pulled into the driveway, Linda was still there, stretching lazily like she owned the place. As he stepped onto the patio, she glanced up, flashing him a condescending smile. "Oh," she gasped, placing a hand over her chest in fake surprise. "I thought you were the new pool guy." The previous owners always let me use their pool. James clenched his jaw. He'd been disrespected before, but this was new. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "I'm not the pool guy. I'm the new owner, and you're trespassing." Linda blinked, her smile faltering. For a second, it was as if she couldn't process his words. Then came the laughter, light, forced, dismissive. "Oh, that can't be right," she said with a wave of her manicured hand. "I know the realtor handling this property." She never mentioned. She trailed off, eyes scanning him up and down, the implication hanging thick in the air. James felt the familiar knot tighten in his gut. He'd spent his entire life proving himself in spaces where people like Linda never expected him to belong, and he was damn tired of it. "There's no mistake," he said, keeping his voice steady. "This is my home, and next time, ask before stepping onto my property." Linda's face darkened, lips pursing as she gathered her things. As she walked past him, she muttered just loud enough for him to hear, "We'll see about that." It wasn't a warning, it was a promise. At first, James hoped that would be the end of it, a misunderstanding. A moment of entitlement that Linda Davenport would let go of once she realized the reality of the situation. But Linda, she wasn't the type to let things go. The first real sign of trouble came on a Saturday morning. James had been looking forward to a lazy day, maybe a little grilling, maybe a swim. But instead of waking up to the smell of fresh coffee, he woke up to the unmistakable sound of splashing. Confused, he threw on a t-shirt and peered through his bedroom window. His jaw dropped. There, in his backyard, lounging on his patio chairs, were four women in designer swimsuits drinking mimosas like they were at some high-end resort. Linda stood in the middle of the pool, flipping her hair like a shampoo commercial. James rubbed his temples. This can't be real. Stepping outside, he cleared his throat loudly. "Morning, ladies, enjoying yourselves." The group turned, startled. One woman nearly dropped her drink. Linda, however, barely blinked. She waved him off, as if he were the intruder. "Oh, don't be difficult, James. We're just having a little fun. The pool barely gets any use, and it's such a shame to let it go to waste." Oh, the audacity. "This is private property," he reminded them, his patience already paper thin. "All of you need to leave, now." One of the women shifted uncomfortably, whispering. Linda said she had permission. James sighed. He was getting real tired of this game. Well, Linda lied. The women scrambled to grab their things, clearly embarrassed. All except Linda. She took her time, stepping out of the pool like she was on a catwalk. As she passed James, she smirked. "Go ahead," she whispered. "Call the cops. My husband plays golf with the precinct captain." Oh, so that's how she wanted to play it. Fine, game on. That afternoon, James installed state-of-the-art security cameras. Motion detectors, alerts sent straight to his phone. If Linda wanted to test him, she was going to learn that he played the long game. The next few weeks, it went from annoying to outrageous. His cameras caught her trying the back gate, peering through his windows, and his personal favorite, testing an old key from the previous owners. It didn't work, of course, but the fact that she tried, oh, she was bold. And then, because of course there was and then, she hosted her book club in his backyard. 8 women, wine, cheese platters. Right next to his pool. James walked in, arms crossed. "So what's on the reading list today?" "How to Trespass for Dummies." The women froze. Linda didn't even flinch. "You're being dramatic," she sighed, swirling her wine. "We're just having a peaceful gathering. You wouldn't want to be the kind of neighbor who makes a scene, would you?" James pulled out his phone and pressed dial. 911, "What's your emergency?" Linda's wine glass hit the table a little too hard. By the time the police arrived, his former colleagues, no less, Linda had flipped into full damsel in distress mode. "Oh, officers, I'm so glad you're here. He's harassing us." One of the officers, a guy James used to work with, sighed so hard, he looked like he aged 5 years on the spot. "Ma'am," he said, rubbing his temple, "James was one of our best officers. If he says you're trespassing, you're trespassing." Linda turned bright red, muttering as she packed up her wine and cheese. But as she left, she shot James one final glare. "This isn't over." James just smiled. She was right, it wasn't. James had dealt with his fair share of criminals during his years on the force, but never in his life had he seen someone so determined to trespass on a property that wasn't theirs. At first, Linda's antics were mildly infuriating, like a mosquito buzzing in his ear. But after the book club incident, she turned it up a notch. The cameras caught everything. One night, to 14 a.m., Linda tiptoed into his yard like some suburban ninja, holding a flashlight, and was that a measuring tape? Another morning, 5:45 a.m., she was stealing his newspaper from the front porch, glancing around like she was part of some high-stakes heist. But the real kicker, the gardening incident. James had always been proud of his backyard, especially his roses. Vibrant, perfectly pruned, a staple of the neighborhood. But Linda, she had other plans. One night, under the cover of darkness, his cameras caught her sprinkling something around the base of his roses. A suspicious white powder. James watched the footage the next morning, sipping his coffee, his jaw tightening. She wasn't just entitled, she was straight up sabotaging his property. By noon, his once thriving roses started to wilt. That was it. James had spent years arresting criminals, but this was personal. He compiled the footage, organizing it like a case file, timestamps, close-ups, every sneaky little stunt Linda had pulled. The next HOA meeting was coming up, and James had a presentation prepared. That night, he walked into the meeting with purpose. Linda sat near the front, feigning innocence, a smug little smile playing on her lips. She had no idea what was coming. James cleared his throat. "I'd like to address a pressing issue in the neighborhood." He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and there she was. Linda, caught red-handed on the TV monitor, vandalizing his yard like a cartoon villain. The room went silent. Linda's face drained of color faster than his dying roses. "I was just checking for suspicious activity," she sputtered. James crossed his arms. "Yeah, and now we all know exactly who that suspicious person is." The HOA president, a no-nonsense woman named Margaret, folded her arms. "Linda, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Linda opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing. The room exploded, neighbors whispering, shaking their heads, throwing Linda looks like she was the local raccoon digging through their trash bins. James just leaned back, arms crossed, and let the footage speak for itself. Linda had spent months trying to make him look like the problem. But now, the whole neighborhood knew exactly who the real menace was. If Linda had any sense of shame, she would have laid low after being exposed at the HOA meeting. But no. Instead, she did what any self-proclaimed neighborhood queen would do. When backed into a corner, she went full-on petty mode. The next morning, James noticed something weird. His morning newspaper was missing. Again. Not stolen for good, just conveniently relocated onto Linda's pristine front porch. Okay. Childish. Then, he started getting HOA complaints. "Your lawn isn't up to neighborhood standards." James looked at his yard. It was flawless, manicured, neatly edged. Better than half the houses on the block. He sent a polite, but strongly worded email to the HOA, attaching pictures of his yard, side by side with Linda's. Hers had a few brown patches. Hers. The complaint magically disappeared. But Linda wasn't done. Suddenly, the neighborhood Facebook page started buzzing with vague posts from concerned residents. "Has anyone noticed a lot of unfamiliar people coming and going from a certain house lately? We should be mindful of changes that affect property values. It's important to keep our community safe. Some new residents just don't share our traditions." Oh, so that's the game now? James wasn't stupid. He had dealt with worse bullies than this. Instead of reacting, he watched, documented, waited. His cameras caught everything: Linda sneaking over to photograph his house at weird hours, spreading fertilizer suspiciously close to his sidewalk, even glaring at his mailbox like it personally offended her. Then came the final insult, the pool. James walked outside one afternoon and froze. His pool, his pristine, resort-level, crystal-clear pool, was now filled with bubbles. Everywhere. It looked like a dish soap explosion. He checked the cameras. Linda. James rubbed his temples, took a deep breath, and exhaled. "All right, Linda, you wanted to play games. Let's play." And for the first time in this whole ridiculous mess, James smiled. James had spent years dealing with criminals who thought they were smarter than the system. And if there was one thing he knew, it was this. The best way to handle a bully isn't to fight fire with fire, it's to let them burn themselves. So when he saw his once perfect swimming pool foaming like a giant bubble bath, he didn't get mad. He didn't storm over to Linda's house demanding answers. He got creative. James sat down with his phone and started doing some research. That's when he remembered a conversation with his old police partner, a case involving a very special kind of pool dye. Not just any dye. This one was completely safe, totally non-toxic, and best of all, it only reacted to specific chemicals found in high-end cosmetics and sunscreen. The kind of sunscreen that someone like Linda Davenport and her luxury-loving friends would slather on before lounging by a stolen pool. James tested a small batch in a bucket first, mixing in a little bit of the exact brand of sunscreen Linda always left on his pool chairs. The result, a bright, unmistakable, slightly horrifying shade of green. Oh, this was going to be good. Through the neighborhood grapevine, James learned Linda was planning another impromptu pool gathering that Saturday. It's just a small get-together, she had told her book club. James is always gone on weekends, it'll be fine, James smirked. That Friday night, under the cover of darkness, he added just the right amount of the special dye into his pool. To the naked eye, the water looked perfectly normal. But once someone covered in expensive sunscreen took a dip, they'd emerge looking like a human-sized Kermit the Frog. And so, the trap was set. That Saturday morning, James made sure Linda saw him leaving, except he wasn't actually gone. He parked around the corner, walked back through his side gate, and settled into his home office, security camera feed open, phone in hand, ready to record. Then, right on schedule, Linda walked through his backyard gate. Like she owned the place, like she had won. James leaned back in his chair and smiled. She had no idea what was coming. James sat back in his chair, phone in hand, watching the security feed like it was the season finale of the best reality show ever. Right on schedule, Linda Davenport strutted through the backyard gate, wearing a designer one-piece, oversized sunglasses, and that permanent expression of entitlement. Behind her, 6 of her equally well-manicured friends followed, carrying expensive beach totes, chilled champagne, and Bluetooth speakers playing soft jazz. They moved with practiced ease, setting up like they were at some kind of 5-star spa retreat. Linda raised her glass dramatically. "Ladies, welcome to our Saturday sanctuary. What the homeowner doesn't know won't hurt him." The women giggled, clinking their glasses. James nearly choked on his coffee. "Oh, Linda, you have no idea." One by one, they slathered on their luxury sunscreen, the exact brand James had tested. Then Linda took the first elegant dive into the pool. Splash. She resurfaced, flipping her hair like she was in a shampoo commercial. "The water's perfect," she called out. Her friends followed, wading in with content sighs. And then it happened. Linda, one of the women, Susan, stared at her own arms in horror. "Is it just me, or is your skin changing color?" Linda blinked. "What are you?" Then she looked down and let out a scream that could have shattered glass. Her hands, her arms, her entire body. A bright, unmistakable, frog green shade. Pandemonium. Screaming, scrambling, designer swimsuits dripping green. My face. One woman shrieked, clutching her cheeks as streaks of emerald dripped down her designer contour. "My daughter's wedding is next week." Another wailed, examining her now lime-colored legs. James was howling. They were running, actually running, out of his backyard, leaving behind towels, drinks, and even a floating bottle of sunscreen. Then, as if things couldn't get better, Linda looked up and spotted one of James's security cameras. The little red light blinked, recording. She let out a strangled sound somewhere between a growl and a dying cat. And then, she ran. "James." He hit save. Oh, this was going to be fun. James didn't just save the footage, he edited it. A little dramatic zoom here, a slow-motion replay there. Some light background jazz, the same music Linda had been playing at her private retreat. And then he uploaded it, not just to the neighborhood Facebook group, not just to his private social media, but to every single major video platform. Within hours, it was a sensation. Karma strikes again. Pool trespasser gets green with envy. The internet ate it up. Comment sections exploded. This is the level of petty I aspire to be. I love how the camera just watches them suffer. The way she looks up at the camera. Somebody get Kermit his cousins. They escaped. And then, local news stations picked it up. James turned on his TV the next morning and nearly dropped his coffee. Austin woman's pool party goes viral, and not in a good way. There, on the screen, was Linda Davenport, still faintly green, trying to explain herself to a very skeptical news reporter. It was an accident, she stammered, wearing way too much makeup in an attempt to cover the lingering green tint. The reporter raised an eyebrow. So you accidentally fell into someone else's private pool? Linda turned red, which, mixed with the green, made her look even worse. James sat back on his couch, grinning like a man who had just won the lottery. But it wasn't just the news. Her real estate agency's Facebook page flooded with green emoji comments. Her HOA emails leaked, and the best part, the neighborhood WhatsApp group finally turned against her. She did the same thing to the Johnsons last year. Remember when she tried to get the park benches removed because they looked cheap? She called the cops on a kid's lemonade stand. A kid. It was like years of frustration had finally boiled over. Linda wasn't just exposed, she was done. James knew karma had done its job when, 2 weeks later, a for sale sign appeared on Linda Davenport's perfectly manicured lawn. He wasn't surprised. After the viral disaster, Linda had become the neighborhood cautionary tale. People avoided her at HOA meetings. Local moms whispered about her at coffee shops, and her own real estate career took a nosedive. Turns out, it's hard to sell million-dollar homes when your name is synonymous with trespassing and turning green. Her final attempt at revenge, a pathetic neighborhood meeting where she tried to spin the whole thing as a community standards issue, claiming James had made the neighborhood less welcoming. But this time, nobody bought it. Somewhere in the back, someone hummed "It's not easy being green." Laughter rippled through the room. Linda's face flushed a terrible shade of beet red. She left the meeting without saying another word. By the time the moving truck arrived, the entire neighborhood was watching. Not out of sympathy, oh no. They were watching like people watch the villain get what they deserve in the final act of a movie. James, of course, didn't gloat. Instead, he did what any decent neighbor would do. He grabbed a glass of lemonade, leaned back on his perfectly legal, properly owned lounge chair, and gave her a polite wave. She didn't wave back. Instead, she got into her car, yanked the steering wheel, and sped off, taking her entitlement, bad attitude, and still slightly green complexion with her. And just like that, peace returned to the neighborhood. The lesson: people like Linda thrive on control. They push, manipulate, and bully until others break. But when you stand your ground, when you document everything, stay calm, and let karma do the dirty work, you don't just win, you take back your peace. A year had passed since Linda Davenport's legendary exit, and James Mitchell's backyard had become the heart of the neighborhood, but this time, by invitation only. The once quiet community now thrived with genuine connection. Kids splashed in the pool, parents gathered for cookouts, and Saturday afternoons were filled with laughter instead of whispered complaints about property values. The irony? The very thing Linda had tried to destroy, James's place in the neighborhood, had only made him more respected. One evening, as he grilled his famous smoky barbecue ribs, his new neighbors, the Harris family, set up a picnic table nearby. They had recently bought Linda's old house, and unlike her, they fit in perfectly. Their twin daughters, both on the local swim team, practiced laps in his pool while their parents chatted with neighbors over fresh lemonade. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman from across the street, walked over with a tray of homemade empanadas. "I should have spoken up sooner," she admitted, handing James a plate. "Linda bullied half the block, but we just let it happen. I think we were all scared of making trouble." James smiled, taking a bite, perfectly seasoned. "Standing up to people like that isn't easy," he said. "But once one person does, others find the courage too." Over the months, stories poured in about how Linda had tried to ban holiday decorations, report unapproved lawn chairs, and even complain about the smell of someone's family barbecue. Now, those same decorations lit up the block during Christmas. Families hosted front yard dinners. People actually talked to their neighbors instead of just nodding politely in passing. James leaned back in his chair, watching the pool lights shimmer on the water. The HOA meetings were shorter, friendlier, and completely free of ridiculous complaints. And the best part, he never had to fight dirty. He never had to raise his voice. He just stood his ground, documented everything, and let karma do what karma does best. And if a certain email popped up in his inbox about Linda causing trouble in her new neighborhood, well, that was just the cherry on top. Lesson learned: some people never change. But if you handle things the right way, you won't have to.